I used to think I was wise until a single proverb exposed the lie I was living. That realization didn't come in a classroom. It didn't come from a book. It came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon while I was standing in my kitchen, staring at a sink full of dishes and a life that felt strangely heavy. My name is Lorraine. I'm 61 years old, married for 35 years, mother of 3 grown children. From the outside, my life looks stable, respectable, predictable. But inside, I had been shrinking. That day, I was scrolling absent-mindedly on my phone when I came across a Native American proverb. You can't wake a person who is pretending to sleep. I don't know why it stopped me. Maybe it was the word pretending. Maybe it was the way it felt less like wisdom and more like a mirror. Because the truth was, I had been pretending for years. Pretending that my husband's indifference didn't sting. Pretending that my daughter's sharp tone didn't wound me. Pretending that being the strong one didn't exhaust me. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Sunlight fell across the kitchen floor in long, tired stripes. I remember gripping the edge of the counter as something inside me shifted, not dramatically, not loudly, just enough to make me uncomfortable. That proverb didn't accuse me. It simply asked, who is really asleep here? And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure I liked the answer.
The next proverb found me later that evening. My husband, Gerald, was in his recliner, television flickering blue across his face. The volume was louder than necessary, like it always was when he didn't feel like talking. I brought him a plate of baked chicken and green beans, set it gently on the side table, and waited for him to look up. He didn't. That was when the second proverb came back to me. When there is no enemy within, the enemies outside cannot hurt you. I stood there longer than I should have, the smell of rosemary still clinging to my hands. Enemy within. For years, I had blamed Gerald's distance, his sarcasm, his silence. I blamed the children for growing impatient with me. I blamed aging, hormones, stress. But if I was honest, my real enemy was fear. Fear of conflict, fear of being alone, fear that if I asked for more, I'd be told I deserved less. "Dinner's getting cold," I said softly. He grunted without turning his head. "I'm watching this." In that moment, I realized something painful. His behavior hadn't changed much over the years. What had changed was my tolerance for it. I had been teaching everyone how to treat me by what I allowed. That night, instead of retreating quietly to wash dishes, I turned off the television. The sudden silence filled the room like a held breath. Gerald stared at me. "What are you doing?" "I'd like to talk," I said, my voice calm but steady. And for the first time in decades, I didn't feel small saying it.
The third proverb waited for me the next morning, scribbled in the corner of a notebook I had used for grocery lists. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. At first, I thought it meant something about land, rivers, forests. But as I looked at my own children, grown, independent, yet quietly watching how Gerald and I moved around each other, I understood its deeper meaning. We borrow their hearts. And I had spent decades borrowing mine. I had silenced my needs, smoothed over arguments, swallowed my hurt, thinking it was easier for everyone. But in doing so, I had taught my children that quiet endurance was the same as strength, that their voices, like mine, should be tempered for comfort. Later that day, my daughter, Marissa, called. I almost ignored it. I had learned to brace myself for criticism or dismissal, but something in me had shifted. I answered. "Hi, Mom," she said. "How's everything?" I hesitated, then spoke from a place I hadn't visited in years. "I've been quiet for too long. I want you to know how I feel, even when it's uncomfortable." There was silence.
I didn't realize, Marissa whispered finally. I never thought about it that way. The words hit me like wind through autumn trees. Awareness, recognition, a chance to break the cycle. Later, Gerald returned from work. I watched him slump into his chair, tired but not cruel, and I knew what the fourth proverb would demand: courage. The soul would have no rainbow if the eyes had no tears. I was ready to cry, not of weakness, but to cleanse the weight I had carried silently for decades.
That evening, I let the tears come. Not the dramatic, loud kind you see in movies, just quiet ones that slid down my cheeks as I sat beside Gerald on the couch, the television off for the first time in years. The house smelled faintly of lavender from the candle I had lit, a small comfort amid the storm of emotions. "I've been lonely," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Not because you weren't here, but because I stopped feeling seen." Gerald's hand twitched against the armrest. His eyes, usually guarded, looked heavy with something I hadn't allowed myself to name: regret. "I thought you were strong," he said, voice cracking, "that you didn't need me to notice." I shook my head. Strength isn't silence. Strength is speaking truth, even when it hurts. Our children, who had wandered into the living room quietly, watched without interrupting. Daniel, my youngest, finally stepped closer. "Mom, I didn't know you felt like this," he murmured, almost to himself. The proverb replayed in my mind. The soul would have no rainbow if the eyes had no tears. And in that moment, I understood. The tears were not weakness. They were honesty. They were a bridge between decades of silence and a future that could finally be real. We talked for hours that night, not accusing, not blaming, just sharing. We discovered habits we had unconsciously carried, patterns we hadn't noticed. I realized that pretending to be okay had only borrowed sorrow for too long, not just from myself, but from them as well. By the time the living room clock chimed midnight, something had shifted. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. It was honest, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like hope. The final proverb was simple, yet it carried a weight I could feel in my bones. Walk lightly in the spring. Mother Earth is pregnant. At first, I thought it was about care for nature, but as I walked through my home that night, the soft hum of the heater, the faint scent of lavender lingering, I realized it was about life itself, about walking carefully through fragile moments, honoring the beginnings that could grow if nurtured. For decades, I had rushed through life, rushed past my own feelings, rushed past the quiet messages in my children's eyes, rushed past Gerald's unspoken fears. And in that hurry, the house felt cold, the conversations hollow, and my own spirit tired. The next morning, I made a small change. I poured Gerald's coffee and waited until he looked at me. "Thank you," he said softly, his hand brushing mine. Not dramatic, not perfect, just acknowledgement. Daniel called later, not with complaints or impatience, but to genuinely ask how I was doing. "I want to hear about your day, Mom," he said, and I told him about the small victories, the proverbs, the tears, the hope. Even Gerald began noticing things he had ignored for years. The way I hummed while cooking, the little notes I left on the fridge, the careful attention I gave to every detail of our home. Slowly, the house began to feel warmer, softer, alive again. These proverbs didn't change my life magically. They gave me perspective, courage, and honesty. They reminded me that life is fragile, that relationships are borrowed treasures, and that truth, even when painful, is the seed of renewal. For the first time in decades,
I was walking lightly, aware, awake, and alive.
Sometimes wisdom arrives quietly, in a line of text, a stranger's words, or a proverb you stumble upon on a Tuesday afternoon. It doesn't shout, it waits. It asks you to look at yourself honestly. These Native American proverbs reminded me that strength isn't pretending, that honesty can heal, and that our hearts are borrowed treasures we must honor. So I want to ask you gently, are there truths in your life you've been too afraid to face? If this story touched you, share your thoughts below. And if you want more stories that quietly awaken the heart, stay with me.